Welcome to The Claw. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger. The Claw is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I am joined today by Jeff Bartsch. He is with Story Greenlight. So Jeff, thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to see you, man. I'm stoked for this.
Yeah, we're going to talk about story, which is such an important part of marketing and often overlooked.
100%. Where should we go?
Well, so first tell me a little bit about Story. I know what Story Greenlight is, but the audience doesn't yet. So tell me a little bit about what do you guys focus on? What's your category and things that you love to do? What makes you get up every day?
Sure. So here's the thing. When people talk about the idea of storytelling, it's really easy to sleep on it. And people say, oh, well, this feels familiar, because the fact is we're all living the story every moment of our lives. But like I say, it is very easy to sleep on it. And when we sleep on the power of powerful communication, communication suffers, human connection suffers, and business suffers, because ultimately business is driven by people. And so when we elevate our communication in a way that creates those human connections, that is how we take the normal and we make it extraordinary. We take the disconnected and we unify it together, and people come together under these kind of ideas. And in terms of Story Greenlight, if you go to storygreenlight.com, that is the main website, you'll see that basically I spent 20 years in Hollywood working for, shaping message and content for Apple and NBC and Universal and Disney and ESPN and all these folks. But really, I've been studying this stuff my entire life, and it's showed up in a whole bunch of different ways. Talk about disconnection. I mean, I started playing piano when I was 4 years old, and I figured out very early on that if I just take these regular melodies on the piano, and I change some notes, I can make Old MacDonald Had a Farm, instead of being happy and exciting place to be, you can make it sad and spooky, because I discovered the minor key playing music. Right. And you take all that kind of stuff and you take the ordinary and you elevate that. That is the power of what storytelling does. And so at Story Greenlight, we take that and we help people in business unlock the power of messaging and make it extraordinary so that people can connect.
Very nice. I love it. And what's so cool about that is we're in the B2B space, and you talked about sleeping on story, and we do B2C, but we do a lot of B2B. And in the B2B world, and it's business to business or business to consumer, I say it's people to people. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just because I walk into my office doesn't mean I'm a different person who's making the decision. It just means the decision I'm making is way more dangerous, because as a business decision, I'm choosing a vendor, I'm going to work with them for a while, could look stupid in front of my boss. So understanding who I'm suggesting to my company to work with, which is what the story does, is such an important part of it. And we'll get into these conversations with our B2B clients, and they're like, that's a bunch of hooey, right?
That's all squishy and you can't measure it.
We sell insurance. We sell whatever. And it's right, you do, but there's a lot of people who do that, And so as you have people who kind of either want to sleep on thinking about their story or don't see it as such a priority, how do you sell against that objection? What do you talk to them about?
The first thing you do is you just look at the world and say, okay, well, it used to be in business that if you have a super special thing or you have a super special piece of information, especially with information, we have the secrets. Pay us money and we will give you the secrets, or we will even guide you through the path of the secrets. But man, unless you are experimenting with the bleeding edge of technology or something like that, there is nothing that we can talk about in business that cannot be found already on the internet for some place, for free. And so information is now a commodity. And so if we're saying, okay, well, information or, information was a differentiation. Well, it's no longer a differentiation. So why should people listen to you?
Yeah.
Why should people trust you? And it's just one of those things where unless you really understand what people are living through, especially the humanity of the people that your business serves, if you don't understand them, they don't care and they're not going to listen, and they don't have to.
Yeah. I talk about, so our mission statement is saving the world from boring, broken marketing. And
I love that.
B2B is,
You are my people.
B2B is typically either boring or broken, or it's both. It's boring and broken because everyone wants to do the big, those inspirational photos. Or I was at a fintech conference a couple weeks ago, and there were 15 booths kind of out in the exhibit space. Every single one of them, you could have swapped them and there would be no difference. They were all the same color blue. They all had the same words on them. All of them had gone out and printed an AI sticker and stuck it somewhere so that at least they were part of the new thing,
Mm-hmm.
And with rare exception, there was just like one company there, they had like a red booth and they were talking about kind of their founder's history. So that gets into that kind of teasing out. So when you're looking at companies, what's the approach? What's your approach for what is the story? Like, how do you know what you should tell?
That's a loaded question that we could talk for hours about because it shows up in lots of different ways. Because, I mean, not only in business does story show up in external marketing, it shows up internally in sales, and it also shows up incredibly powerfully in internal communications. I mean, if you're a business that's bigger than you and a couple of people working in the office, all of a sudden you're bringing on more people to your team, and they may not know why the company was started. They may not know what the company stands for. And God help you if you're trying to merge more than one company. Everyone has their own story, and maybe even the leadership doesn't even know. So it's I'm not to sidestep your question because it's a legit one. The question has to be more specific in terms of what is the brand story? What is the story of the founder? What is the story of this division? What is the story of this product? What is the story of this service? What is the story of the person who is served by the service? You can go all over the place.
So it's sort of the, when Harry met Sally. Like, how did the stories intersect, right?
For sure.
You got that reference. Some of my younger listeners are like, what movie is that? If you haven't seen it,
it's Harry.
Yeah, exactly. But how they intersect, what those things look like. And I kind of set you up at the beginning because we were talking prior to the interview that we do a lot in the M&A category. So we have a lot of clients that are buying other companies. They want to take all the companies to market as one. And so we end up in these situations of determining, now you have this like new entity, it's like, what's the future story going to look like? And so in those situations, what are some things that you've seen work and what doesn't work? Like, how do you know what way to approach that?
Yeah, I will be the first to say that I'm not an M&A guy. However, what I am is a human guy, and M&A is run by humans. So when we talk about this, when we talk about groups of people coming together, everyone from the foundation, everyone is living their own individual story.
Yeah.
Then you have other levels of story happening at the same time. You have an entity which could be considered its own story. Which, and actually, just for clarity's sake, let's just define what a story actually is. In my world, what I say a story is, we say that a story is where a character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result.
Okay, yep.
Just those three elements right there. And so when you apply that, it can apply to you and to me as individuals. It can apply to us as our roles in whatever business we're going to. It can apply to the business itself. It can apply to the board of a business. It can apply to the VCs of a business if it has that. It can stack up all these different levels. And the question is, do all these stories line up?
Right.
And so when you have two businesses that say, we're about this, and the other company says, we're about that, the question is, well, what do they want? Are they getting what they want? Do they identify with as the same character?
Right.
So the question becomes, how do you line them up?
Yeah. And it's so interesting to kind of talk about, so we were working with a company, and they were merging all their businesses together. We have this process we take them through, and we get them to a point to get them to make a choice. and they had a choice. We defined them typically in kind of like these archetypes. And so it's like artisan versus hero. Like those were the two choices that we gave them. And it was a bunch of guys who I think probably were all ex-football players, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that kind of was their history of like having been quarterbacks and, you know, been the hero of the world or whatever. And so they didn't choose hero, which was funny. They chose artisan, and artisan had this very different approach to it. Almost you'd think like Adobe could probably be an artisan brand, right? The way that it goes to market and thinks about it. But as we went through and started to show them what artisan would look like, they kept leaning towards hero. Like every time we would show them an artisan thing, like either a visual or words or whatever, and if there was any hero in it, they're like hero. So they really are a hero brand. We let them think they're artisan, but no, all the language is around being the strong one, like the leader, the like whatever, and owning it, because you really have to own what that is in order to stand out. That's always my biggest concern, is when people do it and they don't do it with it definitively, you know, like they're kind of wishy-washy about what that's going to be.
I got to tell you, it is so important when people talk about story. So many times you go to this far-flung thing of, okay, Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, all these, how to put together a screenplay, how to put together the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all this big epic stuff. But really, the core of it starts with one thing, and it starts with a character. And if the character does not know who they are, that's an issue.
Yeah.
If the character thinks that they're this, but they're actually that, you are, well, you're on your path to unfolding a good story, because you have built-in internal conflict as in terms of who you are as a character.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds like you're dealing with that a lot.
Realization at the last scene. all along the way, I was really, you know, the hero or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're working with human beings in this process, as you said. And so there's this way that they see themselves versus the way that they are. And we want to take people to market the way they are and have them have the ability to be aspirational. Like, how do we get you to where you want to be? Because you can always tell when somebody's got a story that's not their story, right? Like,
yes,
when they're fraudulently wearing some kind of messaging or doing something, you're like, yeah, that's not, yeah, your company does. We're Chick-fil-A, big here in the South, you know, they have the My Pleasure. You always know when another brand tries to pick that up and use it, and they don't mean it authentically. You know, when you go to Chick-fil-A and they say My Pleasure, you know they mean it, right? When you go somewhere else and they do it, you're like, yeah, I think that was just a corporate mandate to go that way. Well, so in your process, so when people come to you, like what I'm curious about for you, because we have a way that we do it, right? But here I'm sitting across from a guy, I mean, like, this is where you live, you were in Hollywood and doing this. Like, what's your starting point? Like, what do you do first when someone says, yeah, we think our company doesn't know its story? Like, what's your first step for them?
It depends on what layers you want to go to. If it's depending on what kind of company it is, if you're talking about an independent professional, it's a lot simpler to kind of focus in on, you know, the personality and history there. But man, when you start getting a brand, when you start getting a company which is made up of lots of different people, then it's really easy to just lose track of the humanity. So one of the things I always talk with my clients about is the idea of what we call the thing under the thing.
Okay.
And it's one of those concepts where anytime you're talking about a story, you have a story and you're talking about something on the surface. Yeah, it is what it is. But anytime you're looking at something on the surface and you end up feeling something, or you end up realizing something that's connected to that, there is something a level deeper that I call the thing under the thing. And other people might call it subtext or, you know, hidden motivations or that kind of thing. But I really like the idea of the thing under the thing, because it is an attachment that you can actively create. So for instance, a friend of mine came to visit me out some time ago in Hollywood, and we're walking down the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and we're walking on the sidewalk that's filled with stars, with people's names on them. That's what the Hollywood Walk of Fame is. And you look at it on the surface, it's a sidewalk with decorations. But depending on what you bring to your, as a person, you look at that and you say, oh, that's Milton Berle. Oh, that's Johnny Cash. Oh, that's Michael Jackson. And you have all these associations that you already have. So you can actually talk about these connections that might already exist between a star on a sidewalk and your idea in your head. And as a parallel, you can talk about things that already exist between your brand or your business and people's existing perceptions of them. But it's equally possible to say, you have this thing and you can create a different connection to it. So a lot of people can talk about people coming out to Los Angeles to fulfill their dreams. A lot of them dream of having a star on the sidewalk. They never have it. Therefore, that sidewalk represents broken dreams. And you can just, you can go all over the place, wherever you want to create those connections. So in business, there will always be an element of what your business means, what is already attached to it. But then you say, okay, what do we want to attach to it? What do we want to be about?
Very good. So let's go to a commercial break, and we come back, we can talk a little bit about that. And it's interesting. I love your idea of the different perspectives, because I'll have a point when we come back. So you're listening to The Claw. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger, talking today with Jeff Bartsch. He is with Story Greenlight, and we're talking about the importance of story, specifically if you think about your marketing and marketing messages. We'll be back in just a second.
The Claw podcast is brought to you by Liger. Liger is a hybrid marketing firm combining a brand strategy consultancy and a production house that offers the full range of content and creative services. We can be your entire marketing department or your entire marketing department's favorite people to work with. We save the world from boring, broken marketing by putting businesses in brand therapy so they can express their most authentic, memorable selves. And then we share their story so they can be known. For more information, visit ligerpartners.com and follow us on our social media platforms.
And we're back. You're listening to The Claw. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger. I'm joined today by Jeff Bartsch. He is with Story Greenlight. I almost called you Project Greenlight. I think that's isn't that a different thing? That's Matt Damon's thing, isn't it?
Different show.
Story Greenlight, right? So he came from LA and learned how to tell stories. And now you work with individuals and companies and all kinds of people to uncover the thing underneath the thing, right?
Among other things.
I like the specificity of that. That's awesome.
There you
go. And I liked when you talked about in the last segment, how the Hollywood stars could represent to some people, well, this person was here at one point, or fame, but it could also introduce like broken dreams, right? Because we think about, from a messaging perspective, you want to both bring the people you want to buy from your company or to interact with you, and you also want to repel. Like, that's part of it, is to make sure that people know, is this thing for me or not, right? Mm-hmm. So story has multiple purposes, if you think about the different components. One of the things I wanted you to unpack for me a little bit, because you talked about working with individuals. When we're working in the B2B world, there's this focus on, hey, we want the company story, right? But we want the individuals who started the company to also tell their story, because if you think about the big companies nowadays that are very successful, you often know who the founder is. You know who's behind it. And you're hearing their story as well. So as you start to approach, people who may be hesitant to tell their story, to not tell it authentically, what's some of the advice that you would give them in that category?
Well, I mean, there are some people who love being forward facing. There are other people who love to lead from behind the curtain. And so the question then becomes, what is the company goal in terms of how you differentiate yourself? Because if it's just on features and benefits, people do it all the time, but that's what everyone does. So good luck standing out. Good luck being a unicorn there. But when it comes to differentiation, as we said, B2B is all about people. It's being driven by people. And so there's always the element in B2B of does the business do what we want? Does it fulfill the need that we feel as the client or as the buyer? But then there's also the idea of, do we care? How are you different? Why should we listen to you in the first place?
Right.
When there are other people who do what you do. So the human differentiation becomes an incredibly powerful thing, especially when you have the founder or the leader who is available, and there was a real reason. Phil Knight didn't start Nike because he wanted to be a global superpower in the sports world. He started Nike because he had relationships with athletes and he wanted to empower them.
Yeah.
So when they hesitate to say, well, my story doesn't matter, a lot of the time what I find is that people don't realize the power of the stories that they've lived. My gosh, I just had a session this past week talking with a guy who and I asked him, what's your superpower? And he said, and he happens to be a classically trained opera singer, and he's a music teacher, just in terms of his context. And he said, oh, my superpower is singing. And he drops these two stories about when he sang in public. And it was as the conversation unfolded, he realized that he said, good grief, this sounds like a Cinderella moment. And I was going, dude, are you kidding me? Yes, this is 100% a Cinderella moment. This is your own Cinderella moment. And every single person, if you have a pulse, if you're a human being, we all have these moments and we don't know the power of them, which is why it's so powerful when you can say, okay, this is why we started this.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to see happen. This is what I wanted to see the business change in the industry or in the lives of the people that we serve. Man, if you can just sit down and get with someone who can unpack that with you, the power is immense.
It is. And that brings up for me, which is interesting, is when we're going through this process with companies, we will ask, if we're working, let's say, with a senior leader that we want to push forward, when we do interviews with people, we ask what that senior leader has done for that person. Like, is there something that they've said that's impactful? Is there something that they've done that's impactful? And often the senior leader doesn't even know it. Like, there's some message, something they said to someone at some point through their career, something they did, and they were just like second nature to them, or just the thing and they're like, yeah, I remember when they said this to me. And it becomes one of those points that we can use as a definer for them, but they're not self-aware enough. They just don't know. They don't often, it's hard to do the work, right? To be that self-aware and understand, where is it that I stand out? You may have to have someone else help you read the label, right?
Yeah, it's super hard to read the label outside your own bottle.
Absolutely. And so how did you get into this work?
I thought I was about doing a whole bunch of different things. Let me just to add another layer to the conversation here. There's what we talk about on the surface. You can connect it to things below the surface. That's the thing under the thing. But then there's something that I also call the thing over the thing, which is a way that brings connectivity, commonality in ways that we may not have experienced or thought about in the past. M&A can benefit a lot from thinking about things over the thing.
Yeah.
In my own life, when I started playing piano when I was 4, for the first 20 years of my life, I was known as Jeff the piano guy. When I got into middle school and high school, I absolutely sucked out loud at sports in a town that worshiped them. So in high school, I ended up discovering that if I could get a video camera on my shoulder and stand on the sidelines of the sports games, I could do videos of the people who were good at the sports. I could make them look good and I could survive. When I got into college, I ended up doing radio.
Yeah.
When I got into film school, I did that. Then I go from film school to 20 years shaping content in Los Angeles. And I thought they were all separate until I realized all of these things can be done at a very basic level. But what really brings the magic, what really brings the elevated connection and the humanity to this is when we do raise the message of what we do. And so that's really how I've gotten to where I am. It's realizing that it's not just about playing piano. It's not just about doing the things. It's about taking a message and elevating it and bringing it to life in a way that brings people together.
And that's such a nice connection into sort of the fear that people are seeing right now around kind of AI.
Yes.
I see it as it's a way to get into the world of curation. So if you have it curate for you, you still have to add your flair to it. You still have to understand, like, that's where that comes in. That's the important part, is like, how do we interpret and use it and whatever, not about, because who wants to go spend 8 hours researching something? Like, I want to have the information come back to me, but it's what I do with that's important, right? And so that's what you've learned, is all the different components. Like, it's really about how you kind of orchestrate those and make it sing.
And at the end of the day, when people are talking about AI, man, yes, it is a game changer, and it is changing the way so many things happen, and still a human initiates it.
Yep.
And a human is on the receiving end of it.
Yep.
And AI is not inherently human. It doesn't bring its own perspective. It doesn't have chemicals flowing through its brain in different ways that make it feel things like humans do.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest when people started to talk about it. I saw someone mention, they're like, it doesn't have feelings. Like, it doesn't cry. It doesn't, feel those things that when you go see a movie or go have a really great experience in a book, read a story, you're like, it was amazing. Like, it took you somewhere, right? So yeah, well, it's been a great conversation. I have one last thing, which I'm just curious with you on, we talked about the M&A, right? So like, a company will say, hey, we're going to go buy this other company. And then they like clash all these cultures together, right? So they've got all these like 3 companies. They used to be this different thing. They were used to going a different way. Do you have any like tips or tricks on how you would get those people aligned better? Like, what could happen? Because what I see in M&A is like, they focus so much on putting them together. Right? Like, let's put these 3 companies together. And then all of a sudden you got 3 different employee groups, and they're now all part of one entity. So aligning them, like, what can we do on the story side to make that work better? Because that can be a stressful. All the company ownership's thrilled, and everybody else is like, oh my gosh, this is like, seems like the worst idea ever, right?
And Maslow is just waving his hand wildly in the background right now in that scenario, because, you bring people together, you bring companies together. The number one thing is, am I secure?
Right.
Am I safe?
Yep.
And if I don't feel I'm secure here, how on earth can I trust the leadership? How can I trust where we're going? How can I trust what we're doing?
Yeah.
Were we to apply story to an M&A situation, the question becomes, who are the characters? What do they want? What's getting in their way? And how do the stories line up? So does everyone feel secure? They want to feel secure. Generally, the employees do. The leadership, they want the business to work together. Is the business going to work together? My brain's going all these different directions because it's an inherently complex scenario, as you well know.
It is. And what's interesting is that when we see it not work most of the time, it's because the cultures between the 2 organizations don't work. That is the time that they'll divest something. It's like, we did this, but it didn't work, and we divested it because the culture of that company, it wasn't about the financials. It wasn't all the things that they consider in the M&A is typically, do we get new customers? Does it get us into new markets? All those are the parameters that drive, this is a good acquisition. And then the thing that'll break it apart is when they try to collide the 2 together and they find that the cultures don't mix. And then they'll divest it from a cultural perspective. So I think it'd be an interesting thing to think about, of like understanding the story of each individually, and could those stories even intersect? Like, would they end up ever on the same road, right? Like, how would you make them tie together?
What does business A want? What does business B want?
Right.
What does the new entity want? Do those things match for this new entity in terms of what they stand for?
Yeah.
What are their corporate things under the thing? What are their corporate values? do they match up? Are they driving in the same direction?
Yeah.
So it's something that takes a lot of digging into, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. I love, because it's such an important part of it. It's this, and specifically with what we do, there's multiple touch points for a customer along the way to actually making the choice. And you have to, you can't tell the story once. You got to tell it over and over again in different parts of it so that people then feel comfortable, like that they trust the brand, they feel like they're aligned to it. So it's such an important part of it. We are doing story with our clients, but not always calling it that. Like we call it things like customer journey and things just because it feels more, but the secret is that's what we're talking about.
Oh, there you go.
Story. So thanks for doing
Of course, man. Great hanging out with you.
So I've been talking today with Jeff Bartsch. He is with Story Greenlight. You've been listening to The Call, which is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm Eric Holtzclaw with Liger, and until next time.